My name is Ryan Cooper, and the first time I walked into my wife's family estate, I thought I was stepping into a future. Turned out I was walking into a trap. They smiled at me that day, shook my hand, called me son. But the moment I signed those marriage papers, everything changed. See, her family didn't just look down on me. They had a plan. And when I finally discovered what it was, I didn't just walk away. I made sure they'd never forget the man they tried to erase. But here's the thing nobody saw coming. The company they used to crush people like me, the one that held the power over half the town, the mortgage firm her father built his empire on. Yeah, I ended up owning that too. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. And when the truth came out at our divorce hearing, let's just say their lawyer went pale. Want to know how a guy from the wrong side of the tracks ended up holding the keys to their kingdom? Stick around. Because what happened next, even I didn't see coming. I grew up in Riverside, a town where people knew your name and your business before you even walked into the grocery store. My father ran a small appliance repair shop on Canton Street, the kind of place where folks brought broken toasters and ancient televisions held together with duct tape and hope. He'd sit at that workbench for hours, soldering wires, replacing circuits, his hands always stained with grease and solder flux. My mother worked double shifts at the hospital as a nurse's aide, coming home with swollen feet and stories about patients who couldn't afford their medications. We weren't poor, not exactly, but we lived in that uncomfortable space where one unexpected expense could topple everything. I learned early that nothing was handed to you. If you wanted something, you worked for it. My first job was at 14, stocking shelves at Morrison's Hardware. By 16, I was doing oil changes at Gary's auto shop on weekends. By the time I graduated high school, I had saved enough to put myself through community college while working nights as a security guard at the industrial park. It wasn't glamorous. Nobody wrote inspiration stories about guys like me. But I was building something, even if I couldn't see the shape of it yet. That's where I met her. Amanda Hartley. She was taking business classes at the same community college, though I found out later she was only there because her father insisted she understand how regular people lived before she took over any part of the family business. She sat 3 rows ahead of me in economics, always perfectly put together, hair pulled back in a way that looked effortless but probably took 30 minutes. Designer bag that cost more than my entire semester's tuition. But she didn't act like the other rich kids who slummed it at community college for a semester before transferring somewhere with a name you'd recognize. The first time we spoke, she dropped her notebook, and papers scattered across the hallway. I helped her pick them up, and she actually looked at me. Not through me, not past me, at me. She smiled, said thank you, and asked if I understood the chapter on market equilibrium because she was completely lost. I explained it to her in the library that afternoon. Then we got coffee. Then we got dinner. 3 months later, we were inseparable. Amanda was different when it was just us. She laughed at my jokes, even the terrible ones. She didn't care that I drove a beaten Toyota with a passenger door that stuck. She'd show up at the auto shop during my shifts, sitting on the hood of whatever car I was working on, telling me about her day. For the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't just working towards something. I was living something worth working for. I should have known it was too easy. 6 months into dating, she finally invited me to meet her family. The Hartley estate sat on 40 acres outside town, the kind of property you only saw in movies. A long driveway lined with oak trees led to a house that could comfortably fit 5 families. Stone facade, tall windows, a fountain in the front circle that probably cost more than my dad's shop. When I pulled up that evening, I sat in my car for a full minute, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to convince myself I belonged there. Amanda met me at the door, wearing a blue dress that made her eyes look even brighter. She squeezed my hand and whispered that everything would be fine, that her parents were excited to meet me. I wanted to believe her. Inside, the house was exactly what you'd expect. High ceilings, artwork that looked important, furniture that seemed afraid to be sat on. Her father, Gerald Hartley, stood in the living room wearing a cardigan that probably cost what I made in a month. Tall, silver hair, the kind of handshake that felt like a test. Her mother, Patricia, offered a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She looked me up and down in a way that made me want to check if my shirt was tucked in properly. Dinner was served in a dining room with a table long enough to seat 12. It was just the four of us, but we sat spread out like we were afraid to get too close. I tried to make conversation, asked about the family business. Gerald ran Hartley Financial Group, a mortgage and investment firm that had been in the family for 3 generations. They held mortgages on half the commercial properties in town and a good chunk of residential ones too. He spoke about it the way some people talk about their children, with pride and possession. I told them about my father's repair shop, about how I was working toward a business degree so I could maybe help him expand someday. Patricia nodded politely, but I caught the look she exchanged with Gerald. It wasn't contempt exactly, more like quiet amusement, the way you'd smile at a child who said they wanted to be an astronaut. Amanda tried to steer the conversation, asked her mother about the charity gala they were planning. But the damage was done. I could feel it in the air, thick and uncomfortable. I didn't belong here, and they knew it. After dinner, Gerald invited me into his study for a drink. I followed, hoping this was some kind of bonding moment, the part where he'd tell me he respected hard work and ambition. Instead, he poured 2 glasses of scotch that probably cost more than my rent and got straight to it. "You seem like a decent young man," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. Amanda's had her fun, experimented a bit, dated people from different backgrounds. It's good for her to see how the other half lives. But you have to understand, our family has certain expectations. Certain standards. I held the glass but didn't drink. "What are you saying?" He smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't involve warmth. "I'm saying you're a phase. And phases end. I'm sure you understand." I set the glass down on his desk, stood up, and walked out without another word. Amanda found me in the driveway, asked what happened. I told her. She looked hurt, angry, but not surprised. That's when I should have known. If you're not surprised by cruelty, it means you've seen it before. It means you've lived with it. But she cried. She told me her father was old-fashioned, stuck in his ways, that it didn't matter what he thought because she loved me. And I wanted to believe her. I wanted it so badly that I ignored every warning sign flashing in front of me. We kept dating. She stopped talking about her family much, and I stopped asking. A year later, I proposed with a ring I saved 8 months to buy. It wasn't much, a simple band with a small diamond, but it was mine. She said yes. She cried again, happy tears this time, and for a moment, I thought maybe we'd actually make it work. The wedding was small, not because I wanted it that way, but because her family insisted on it. They framed it as intimate, elegant, but I knew the truth. They didn't want a big event where people would ask questions about the groom. My family came, my father in the one suit he owned, my mother beaming despite the cold stares from Patricia's friends. Amanda looked beautiful. I meant every word of those vows. I thought she did too. We moved into a small house on the east side of town, nothing fancy, but it was ours. I graduated, got a job at a mid-size accounting firm, worked my way up. Amanda took a position at her father's company, something vague in communications that seemed to involve a lot of lunches and very few actual tasks. We had dinners with her family once a month, stiff awkward affairs where I was politely ignored or asked patronizing questions about my work. But I told myself it didn't matter. We were building our own life, separate from them. Then things started to shift. Small things at first. Amanda would come home from work and mention casually that her father thought we should consider moving to a better neighborhood, somewhere more appropriate for someone in her position. I'd brush it off, say we were fine where we were. She'd agree, but the suggestion would come up again a few weeks later, rephrased, softened, but still there. She started spending more time at her parents' house, helping with events, sitting in on business meetings. She'd come home later, more distracted, and when I asked about her day, her answers got shorter. One night, about 2 years into our marriage, I came home early from work. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'd finished a big project ahead of schedule and wanted to surprise her with dinner. When I walked in, she was on the phone in the kitchen, her back to me. I heard her laugh, that light carefree sound I hadn't heard in months. Then I heard her words. "No, he doesn't suspect anything. He's too busy trying to prove himself at that little job of his." She paused, listening. I know. Just a bit longer. Once the paperwork is finalized, we can move forward." I stood frozen in the doorway. She turned, saw me, and her face went pale. The phone slipped slightly in her hand. I asked who she was talking to. She said a friend, a work thing, nothing important. But her eyes didn't match her words. That was the first crack. I didn't confront her fully that night, didn't demand answers. Maybe I was afraid of what I'd hear. Instead, I started paying attention. Really paying attention. I noticed how she'd angle her phone away when texting. How she'd take calls in the other room. How she'd started dressing up more for work, spending extra time on her appearance before heading to her father's office. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of work was getting to me. But the feeling wouldn't go away, like something was crawling under my skin. A few months later, Amanda suggested we have dinner with her parents to discuss something important. She wouldn't tell me what, just said it was a family matter. I agreed, even though every instinct told me not to. We drove to the estate on a Saturday evening, the same long driveway, the same imposing house. But this time, the weight of it felt different. Heavier. More final. Gerald and Patricia were waiting in the dining room, along with someone I didn't recognize. A man in his mid-30s, wearing an expensive suit, confident smile, the kind of guy who looked like he'd never been told no in his life. Gerald introduced him as Brandon Pierce, a family friend and associate at Hartley Financial. Brandon shook my hand firmly, held it just a second too long. Amanda sat down next to me, but I noticed she didn't look at Brandon. She didn't need to. The familiarity was already there in the way they existed in the same room. Gerald cleared his throat, launched into what he called a family discussion. He talked about legacy, about the future of Hartley Financial, about ensuring the right people were in the right positions. Then he slid a folder across the table toward me. I opened it. Inside were divorce papers. Already filled out. Already dated. My name on one line, Amanda's on another. I stared at the pages, trying to process what I was seeing. "This is a joke," I said, looking at Amanda. She didn't respond, just looked down at her hands. "This isn't a joke," Gerald said calmly. "This is us being efficient. Your marriage has run its course. Amanda has other opportunities, better aligned with our family's goals. We're prepared to make this easy for you. There's a settlement offer in there. Generous, considering the circumstances." I flipped through the papers. The settlement was $75,000. A clean break, no alimony, no claims to any shared assets. I looked at Amanda again, waiting for her to say something, to tell her father he was insane. But she just sat there, silent, complicit. "You knew about this," I said to her. It wasn't a question. She finally met my eyes. "I'm sorry, Ryan. This is what's best. For both of us." "Best for you," I said, my voice low. "You've been planning this the whole time, haven't you?" "Since the beginning." Gerald leaned back in his chair, completely at ease. "You were a project, Ryan. A phase, like I told you. Amanda needed to experience life outside her world. You served that purpose. Now it's time to move on." Brandon, who had been sitting quietly, finally spoke up. "No hard feelings, man. Sometimes things just don't work out. But hey, that settlement should set you up pretty well. Start fresh, you know?" I wanted to lunge across the table. I wanted to scream, to flip the whole damn thing over. But I didn't. I closed the folder, stood up slowly, and looked at each of them. Gerald, smug and satisfied. Patricia, indifferent as ever. Brandon, smirking like he'd already won. And Amanda, unable to hold my gaze. "I'm not signing this," I said. Gerald's smile faded slightly. "Then we'll do this the hard way. Either option, the outcome is the same. You're out." I walked out of that house for what I thought would be the last time. But I was wrong. I'd be back. And when I returned, everything they thought they knew about me would be shattered. The drive home was a blur. I don't remember most of it, just the sound of my own breathing, the way my hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. When I pulled into our driveway, I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the house Amanda and I had lived in for 2 years. It looked smaller now, like it had shrunk in the hours since I'd left. I walked inside, and the silence felt different. Not peaceful, empty. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with the folder open in front of me, reading every line of those divorce papers over and over. There were clauses I didn't fully understand, legal terms that seemed designed to confuse. But the message was clear. They wanted me gone, erased, as if I'd never been part of Amanda's life at all. The settlement was designed to look generous, but it was really just a payment to disappear quietly. $75,000 to walk away and never look back. To people like the Hartleys, that was pocket change. To me, it was supposed to feel like winning the lottery. But all I felt was hollow. By the time the sun came up, I'd made a decision. I wasn't signing. Not because I wanted to drag things out, not because I still loved Amanda, that had died the moment I saw those papers. I wasn't signing because I needed to understand what I'd missed. How long had this been planned? What else had they done behind my back? And why did Gerald seem so confident that he could just sweep me aside like I was nothing? I called in sick to work, something I almost never did, and spent the day digging. I started with our finances, pulling up bank statements, credit card records, anything I could access. That's when I noticed something odd. About 6 months into our marriage, Amanda had opened a separate account. I'd never seen statements for it, never even knew it existed. She'd been careful, but not careful enough. I found a single transaction receipt buried in an old email, a transfer from that account to something called HFG Holdings. I searched the name. HFG Holdings was a subsidiary of Hartley Financial Group, but it wasn't listed on their main website. I dug deeper, using public records databases, cross-referencing names and addresses. What I found made my stomach turn. HFG Holdings owned the mortgage on our house. Not a bank, not some third-party lender. Amanda's family. They'd held the note the entire time, and I'd never known. Every payment I'd made, every dollar I'd scraped together, had gone straight into their pockets. But it got worse. I found another transfer, dated 3 months ago. $50,000 from Amanda's separate account into an escrow fund tied to a property purchase. The address was for a condo downtown, a luxury building I'd driven past 100 times. I pulled the property records. The condo was registered under Amanda's name and Brandon Pierce. They'd bought it together. They were already living a life without me before the divorce papers were even printed. I sat back, staring at the screen, trying to process the depth of the betrayal. This wasn't just a marriage falling apart. This was a coordinated operation. They'd used me, controlled me, and now they were discarding me like I was defective merchandise. For the first time since I'd walked out of that estate, I felt something other than hurt. I felt anger. Cold, clear, focused anger. I needed help. I couldn't do this alone, and I didn't trust anyone connected to the Hartleys. So I called the one person I knew who'd dealt with people like them before. His name was Victor Rains, a lawyer who'd grown up 2 streets over from me in Riverside. He'd clawed his way through law school, built a reputation taking on cases nobody else wanted, and won more often than he lost. We'd been friends in high school, lost touch over the years, but I knew he'd remember me. He answered on the 3rd ring. His voice was gruff, impatient. "Ryan Cooper," I said. There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "I'll be damned. It's been what, 10 years? What do you need?" "I need someone who knows how to fight dirty," I said. He laughed. "Come by the office tomorrow. Let's talk." Victor's office was above a pawnshop on the south side, small and cluttered with case files stacked on every surface. He sat behind a desk that looked like it had survived a war, leaning back in a chair that squeaked every time he moved. He listened while I explained everything, didn't interrupt, just nodded occasionally and took notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he tossed his pen down and leaned forward. "They really thought this through," he said. "And they assumed you'd roll over." "I'm not rolling over." "Good. Because if you want to fight this, we're going to have to get creative. The Hartleys have money, connections, and a law firm that'll bury you in paperwork. But they also have something else. Arrogance. They think they're untouchable. That's where we hit them." He pulled out a file from his drawer, flipped it open. "I've dealt with Hartley Financial before. Represented a couple who lost their home when Gerald restructured their loan terms without proper notification. We settled out of court, but I kept digging after that case closed. Hartley Financial isn't as clean as they pretend to be. There are whispers, complaints that got buried, people who got pushed out before they could make noise. If we dig deep enough, we'll find something." I felt a flicker of hope. "What do you need from me?" "Everything," Victor said. "Bank records, emails, text messages, anything that shows what they've been doing. And I need you to stay quiet. Don't talk to Amanda, don't respond to Gerald's lawyers. Let them think you're scared. Let them think you're going to sign." Over the next 2 weeks, I became obsessed. I went to work, did my job, came home, and spent every evening combing through documents. I found more transfers, more hidden accounts. Amanda had been funneling money out of our joint account for over a year, small amounts at first, then larger sums. I found emails between her and her father discussing the timeline for the divorce, talking about me like I was a problem to be solved. One email from Gerald stood out. "It's almost over. Once he signs, we can move forward with Brandon. Amanda deserves better than this phase." I forwarded everything to Victor. He worked fast, filing motions, requesting discovery, forcing Hartley Financial to turn over records they didn't want to share. Their lawyers tried to shut it down, called it a fishing expedition, but Victor was relentless. He found inconsistencies in loan documents, questionable foreclosures, clients who'd been charged fees that weren't disclosed. It wasn't enough to bring them down, not yet, but it was enough to make them nervous. Then Victor found something big. Hartley Financial had been buying up distressed properties, offering loans to people who couldn't afford them, then foreclosing quickly and reselling at a profit. It wasn't illegal exactly, but it was predatory. And one of those properties had belonged to a family I knew. The Dawsons, who'd lived 3 houses down from my parents. I remembered when they lost their house 5 years ago, remembered my mother crying because Mrs. Dawson had been her friend. Hartley Financial had held that mortgage. I sat in Victor's office, staring at the paperwork. "They've been doing this for years," he said. "Targeting families who are barely holding on, trapping them in loans they can't escape. If we can prove a pattern, if we can show intent, we can file a class action. But that takes time. And right now, we need leverage for your case. What do you suggest?" Victor smiled. "We go after the thing they care about most. Their reputation." He drafted a letter, not to Gerald or his lawyers, but to the State Financial Regulatory Board. It outlined everything we'd found, every questionable transaction, every predatory loan. It didn't accuse them of crimes, just raised concerns that warranted investigation. Victor sent it, and then we waited. 3 days later, Gerald's lawyer called. They wanted to meet. We met at a neutral location, a conference room in a downtown office building. Gerald was there, along with Patricia and 2 lawyers who looked like they billed by the minute. Amanda wasn't there. I don't know if I was relieved or disappointed. Gerald didn't shake my hand this time, just gestured to a chair like I was an inconvenience. "Let's cut to the chase," he said. "You're making noise, and it's irritating. What do you want?" Victor answered before I could. "Our client wants a fair settlement. Full disclosure of all financial dealings during the marriage, including hidden accounts and property purchases. And we want answers about Hartley Financial's lending practices." One of the lawyers, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper suit, leaned forward. "Those are separate issues. Your client's divorce has nothing to do with our business operations." Victor smiled. "It does if those operations were funded in part by money taken from marital assets. It does if Mrs. Cooper used joint funds to invest in properties with a third party while still legally married." Gerald's jaw tightened. "You're reaching." "Maybe," Victor said. "Or maybe we're just getting started. The state board seems interested in what we found. I'm sure they'd love to dig deeper." The room went quiet. Patricia, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. "How much do you want?" I met her eyes. "I don't want your money. I want the truth. And I want to make sure you can't do this to anyone else." Gerald laughed, but it sounded forced. "Noble. But impractical. Everyone has a price, Ryan. Even you." I stood up. "You don't know me as well as you think you do." We walked out, leaving them sitting there. Victor was grinning. "That went well," he said. "They're scared. But they'll come back harder," I said. "Let them," Victor replied. "Because while they're focused on us, I've got someone else digging into their finances. And what we found so far is just the surface." 2 days later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, older, cautious. "Is this Ryan Cooper?" "Yes." "Who is this?" "My name is Edward Voss. I used to work for Hartley Financial Group. I heard you're asking questions. I'd like to talk." We met at a diner on the edge of town, one of those places with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner since morning. Edward Voss was in his 60s, gray hair, tired eyes, the look of someone who'd carried a heavy secret for too long. He slid into the booth across from me, ordered black coffee, and got straight to it. "I worked in acquisitions for Gerald for 15 years, he said. "I helped structure loans, managed foreclosures, handled property transfers. I thought I was doing legitimate work. Then I started noticing patterns." "What kind of patterns?" "Loans that were designed to fail. Families who were pushed into terms they didn't understand, then foreclosed on within months. Properties that were bought back by shell companies tied to the Hartleys, then resold at huge markups. I flagged it to Gerald, asked if we should review our practices. He told me to mind my business. When I pushed, I was let go. No severance, no explanation. Just gone." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I've been watching what you're doing," Edward said. "And because I kept records. Copies of loan documents, emails, transaction histories. Everything Gerald tried to bury. I didn't know what to do with it before. But if you're serious about taking them on, I'll help you." I stared at him, trying to process what he was offering. "Why now?" He looked down at his coffee. "Because I'm tired of staying quiet. And because people like Gerald Hartley don't stop unless someone makes them." I called Victor immediately. Within a week, we had boxes of documents, years of evidence showing a systematic pattern of predatory lending and financial manipulation. It was enough to build a case, not just for my divorce, but for something bigger. Victor contacted a journalist he knew, someone who specialized in financial corruption. The story started to take shape. Then Amanda called. I hadn't heard from her in weeks, and seeing her name on my phone made my chest tighten. I almost didn't answer. But I did. Her voice was small, shaken. "Ryan, we need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," I said. "Please," she said. "Just meet me. Once." I'll explain everything. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a park near where we used to live, neutral ground. She was sitting on a bench when I arrived, hands folded in her lap, looking smaller than I remembered. I sat down, kept my distance. She didn't look at me at first, just stared out at the empty playground. I didn't know it would go this far, she said quietly. I thought it would be simple. Clean. You thought destroying my life would be clean? She flinched. I know how it sounds. But you have to understand, I was raised in that world. My father, he has a way of making you believe that what he wants is what's right. I convinced myself you'd be fine, that the settlement was fair. Did you ever love me? I asked. She was quiet for a long time. I thought I did. Maybe I did, in my own way. But I was never strong enough to stand up to them. And when Brandon came back into my life, when my father started pushing for the divorce, it felt easier to just go along with it. Easier, I repeated. She finally looked at me, and I saw tears in her eyes. I'm sorry, Ryan. I know that doesn't fix anything. But I am. You should have thought about that before you helped them plan this, I said, standing up. Before you let them treat me like I was nothing. I know, she whispered. I walked away, and I didn't look back. Whatever we'd had, it was gone. And I was done mourning it. The divorce hearing was set for 3 weeks later. Victor assured me we had enough to fight the settlement terms, maybe even go after some of the assets Amanda had hidden. But the night before the hearing, something unexpected happened. I got an email from an anonymous account. No subject line, just an attachment. I opened it. Inside was a document I'd never seen before. A promissory note, signed by Gerald Hartley, transferring majority ownership of Hartley Financial Group to a trust. The date on the note was 2 months before my wedding. The beneficiary of the trust wasn't listed by name, just an account number. I forwarded it to Victor immediately. He called me within minutes. Where did you get this? I don't know. It just showed up. Victor was quiet for a moment. If this is real, it changes everything. Gerald doesn't fully own Hartley Financial. Someone else does. And if we can figure out who, we might have the leverage we need. We worked through the night, tracing the account number, cross-referencing financial records. It led to a shell company registered in Delaware, then another in the Cayman Islands. Dead ends, layers designed to hide the truth. But Victor didn't give up. He had a contact, someone who specialized in untangling corporate structures. By morning, we had a name. The trust was controlled by a holding company called Summit Acquisitions. And Summit Acquisitions had recently been bought out. By me. I stared at the documents, not understanding. How is that possible? Victor was grinning. Edward Voss. He didn't just give us evidence. He gave us a way in. When he left Hartley Financial, he took more than just records. He took stock options, deferred compensation, assets Gerald thought were buried. Voss sold those assets to a holding company he created, then transferred that company to you as part of a settlement for wrongful termination. You didn't just get evidence, Ryan. You got control. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. So I own Hartley Financial? Not entirely, Victor said. But you own enough to have a say. Enough to force changes. Enough to make Gerald very, very uncomfortable. The next morning, I walked into that courtroom with my head high. Amanda was there, sitting beside her father, looking pale. Gerald looked calm, confident, like this was just another day. The judge called the case, and Gerald's lawyer stood up, started outlining the terms of the settlement they wanted. But before he could finish, Victor stood. Your Honor, we'd like to present new evidence relevant to the division of assets. The judge looked skeptical but allowed it. Victor laid out everything. The hidden accounts, the properties bought with marital funds, the predatory loans, and finally, the ownership structure of Hartley Financial Group. Gerald's face went from confident to confused to furious in a matter of seconds. His lawyer tried to object, called it irrelevant, but the judge was already interested. And when Victor presented the documents showing that I now held a controlling interest in the company Gerald had built his empire on, the courtroom went silent. Gerald stood up, his voice shaking. "This is absurd. That company is mine." "Not anymore," Victor said calmly. "Your former employee, Edward Voss, transferred his shares to my client as part of a settlement. Those shares, combined with other assets Mr. Cooper has acquired, give him majority control. You don't own Hartley Financial anymore, Mr. Hartley." "He does." I looked at Gerald, watched the realization sink in. The man who'd called me a phase, who'd tried to erase me, was now staring at the fact that I held the keys to everything he'd built. Amanda looked at me, shock and something else in her eyes. Maybe regret. Maybe fear. I didn't care anymore. The judge called for a recess to review the documents. When we reconvened, the settlement terms had changed. Amanda would get nothing beyond what she'd brought into the marriage. The house, the hidden accounts, all of it would be divided fairly. And Hartley Financial would be subject to a full audit. As we walked out of the courtroom, Gerald tried to approach me. His lawyers held him back, but I heard him shout. "You have no idea what you're doing. You'll destroy everything." I turned back, looked him in the eye. "No," I said. "I'm just making sure you can't destroy anyone else." The days after the hearing felt surreal. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to tell me it was all a mistake, that the documents were fake, that I didn't actually control anything. But every morning I woke up, checked my email, and saw confirmation after confirmation. Lawyers reaching out. Financial advisors requesting meetings. Letters from Hartley Financial employees asking about the future of the company. It was real. I owned the thing Gerald Hartley had spent his entire life building. Victor handled most of the immediate legal fallout. There were motions to file, injunctions to fight, and a whole parade of expensive lawyers trying to find loopholes that would undo what had happened in that courtroom. But the documents were solid. Edward Voss had been meticulous, and the transfer of shares was completely legal. Gerald could scream all he wanted, but the reality was simple. He'd lost control. I didn't move into the Hartley Financial offices right away. Part of me wanted to walk through those glass doors and sit in Gerald's chair just to see the look on everyone's faces. But I held back. I needed to understand what I was actually dealing with before I made any moves. So I spent the next week in Victor's cramped office, surrounded by file boxes and financial statements, learning everything I could about the company I now controlled. Hartley Financial Group wasn't just a mortgage company. It was a sprawling operation with tentacles in commercial real estate, property management, investment funds, and a dozen subsidiary companies I'd never heard of. Gerald had built an empire, but he'd done it by cutting corners, exploiting loopholes, and crushing anyone who got in his way. The more I read, the angrier I got. Not just for myself, but for everyone he'd hurt along the way. Edward Voss became an unexpected mentor during those weeks. He'd stop by the office most afternoons, bringing coffee and his institutional knowledge of how Hartley Financial actually operated. He knew where the bodies were buried, which executives could be trusted, and which ones were just as corrupt as Gerald. He also knew the clients, the families who'd been targeted, the properties that had been stolen through legal manipulation. One afternoon, Edward brought in a list. It was handwritten, dozens of names in neat columns. "These are the people who lost their homes in the last 5 years," he said, sliding it across the table. Families who were pushed into bad loans, then foreclosed on when they couldn't keep up with payments that kept increasing. Some of them are still fighting. Most gave up. I ran my finger down the list, and halfway through, I stopped. My chest tightened. Dawson, Michael, and Patricia. I knew that name. I knew those people. They'd lived down the street from my parents, had been part of our neighborhood for as long as I could remember. Mrs. Dawson used to bring over casseroles when my mom worked late shifts. Mr. Dawson had helped my dad fix our roof one summer, spending his weekends up there in the heat because that's what neighbors did. I looked up at Edward. The Dawsons. What happened? He pulled out a thick file, flipped it open. Standard predatory setup. They took out a home equity loan to pay for medical bills. Patricia had cancer, treatments weren't covered by insurance. Hartley Financial approved the loan, but the terms were designed to escalate. Within 18 months, their payments doubled. They tried to refinance, but Gerald had them marked as high risk. When they fell behind, foreclosure proceedings started immediately. They were out within 6 months. Where are they now? Edward shook his head. I don't know. Last I heard, they were renting a place on the other side of town. But that was 3 years ago. I sat back, staring at the file. I remembered when they lost their house. I'd been away at college, but my mom had called me, crying, telling me how unfair it was, how the Dawsons had done everything right and still ended up with nothing. I'd felt helpless then, like there was nothing I could do. But now, looking at their file, at the signatures and the clauses designed to trap them, I realized I could do something. I had to. That night, I drove to my parents' house. I hadn't told them much about what was happening, just that the divorce was messy and I was dealing with it. My dad was in the garage when I arrived, elbow deep in someone's broken dishwasher, music playing from an old radio covered in grease stains. He looked up when I walked in, smiled, wiped his hands on a rag that was already too dirty to help. You look like hell, he said. Thanks, Dad. I mean it. You eating? Sleeping? I'm managing. He set down his tools, leaned against the workbench. Your mother's worried. Says you haven't been returning her calls. I know. I'm sorry. I've just been dealing with a lot. He nodded, didn't push. That was my dad's way. He never pried, just made space for you to talk if you needed to. I helped him finish fixing the dishwasher, and then we went inside. My mom was in the kitchen, making dinner even though it was just the two of them. She hugged me tight when she saw me, held on a little longer than usual. You're too skinny, she said, pulling back to look at me. I'm feeding you. I didn't argue. We ate together, and for a little while, I let myself forget about Hartley Financial, about Gerald and Amanda and all of it. I just sat at the table I'd grown up eating at, listening to my parents talk about their day, feeling like maybe I hadn't lost everything after all. After dinner, I asked my mom about the Dawsons. Her face fell immediately. Oh, honey. That was such a terrible thing. They lost everything because of those loan people. Hartley something. Hartley Financial, I said. She nodded. Patricia's doing better now, the cancer's in remission. But they're barely scraping by. Michael's working 2 jobs just to keep them in that little apartment they're in. It's not right. No, I said. It's not. But I'm going to fix it. She looked at me, confused. What do you mean? I took a breath. I own Hartley Financial now, Mom. The company that took their house. I own it. The silence that followed was heavy. My dad set down his coffee mug, stared at me. My mom's eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were happy or sad. How? She finally asked. It's complicated, I said. But I'm going to use it to make things right. For the Dawsons. For everyone Gerald Hartley hurt. My dad stood up, walked over, and put his hand on my shoulder. He didn't say anything, just squeezed once. That was enough. Over the next few days, I started making calls. I reached out to the Dawsons through my mom, who still had Patricia's number. At first, they didn't want to talk to me. They thought it was some kind of scam, another way to hurt them. But eventually, Patricia agreed to meet me at a coffee shop downtown. She looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that went deeper than just lack of sleep. She sat across from me, arms folded, guarded. Your mother says you want to help, she said. But I've heard that before. I don't trust people who say they want to help. I get that, I said. And I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm just asking you to listen. I explained everything. How I'd married into the Hartley family, how they tried to destroy me, how I'd ended up with control of the company. I told her I'd seen her file, that I knew what Gerald had done. And I told her I wanted to give them their house back. She stared at me for a long time, and then she started crying. Not loud, just quiet tears that she wiped away quickly, like she was embarrassed. That house was ours, she said. We raised our kids there. We thought we'd die there. And they took it like it meant nothing. I know, I said. And I can't undo what happened. But I can give it back. It took weeks to untangle the legal mess. The house had been sold to one of Gerald's shell companies, then flipped to another buyer who'd rented it out. But Victor found a way. We bought the house back at market value, then transferred the deed to the Dawsons. No strings, no mortgage, just theirs. When I handed Patricia the keys, she collapsed into my arms, sobbing. Michael shook my hand so hard I thought he'd break it, kept saying thank you over and over until his voice gave out. That was the first one. But it wouldn't be the last. I went through Edward's list, one name at a time. Some cases were easier than others. Some families had moved on, didn't want to dredge up the past. But the ones who did, the ones who wanted justice, I helped them. We restructured loans, forgave debts, returned properties. It wasn't about the money. It was about proving that people like Gerald didn't get to win forever. Word started to spread. Local news picked up the story, ran a piece about the new owner of Hartley Financial making amends for past wrongs. Reporters called, wanted interviews. I turned most of them down, but Victor convinced me to do one. Just one, to set the record straight. The interview aired on a Tuesday evening. I sat in my apartment, watching myself on screen, talking about predatory lending and corporate accountability. It felt strange, like I was watching someone else. But the response was immediate. My phone didn't stop ringing for days. People I hadn't heard from in years called to congratulate me. Strangers sent emails thanking me for standing up to people like the Hartleys. But there were also threats. Anonymous messages telling me to watch my back, that I was making powerful enemies. I tried to ignore them, but Victor took them seriously. He hired a security consultant, someone to keep an eye on things, make sure I wasn't walking into something dangerous. The threats weren't empty. 2 weeks after the interview aired, someone broke into the Hartley Financial offices. They trashed files, smashed computers, spray-painted threats on the walls. The police investigated, but they didn't find anything useful. No fingerprints, no witnesses, just a message. Back off or else. I knew it was Gerald. He was losing control, and he was lashing out. But instead of scaring me, it just made me more determined. I started spending more time at the Hartley Financial offices, meeting with employees, learning how the company actually ran day to day. Most of the staff were decent people just trying to do their jobs. They didn't know about the predatory loans, the shell companies, the corruption. They just processed paperwork and answered phones. But there were a few executives who'd been with Gerald for years, who knew exactly what was happening and had profited from it. Those were the ones I needed to deal with. The first was Richard Moss, the head of acquisitions. He'd been Gerald's right hand for over a decade, the guy who identified vulnerable properties and structured the loans that trapped people. Edward had warned me about him, said he was ruthless and loyal only to himself. I called him into my office on a Friday afternoon. He walked in with a smirk, like this was all some kind of joke. He sat down without being invited, leaned back in the chair like he owned it. "So you're the new boss," he said. "Gerald's told me all about you." "I'm sure he has," I replied. Richard laughed. "Look, I get it. You want to play hero, make some headlines, feel good about yourself. But this company doesn't run on good intentions. It runs on profit. And if you start giving away houses and forgiving loans, you'll tank it within a year." "Maybe," I said. "But I'd rather tank it than keep doing what Gerald was doing." His smirk faded. "You don't know what you're talking about. You're in over your head." "Probably," I said. But I'm still the one in charge. And you're fired. His face went red. You can't fire me. I have a contract. I slid a folder across the desk. Inside was everything Edward had given me about Richard. Loans he'd falsified, kickbacks he'd taken, families he'd personally targeted. Take it to a lawyer if you want, I said. But if you do, all of this becomes public record. He stared at the folder, then at me. His hands were shaking. You're making a mistake. No, I said. I'm fixing one. He stood up, grabbed the folder, and walked out without another word. I watched him go, and for the first time since this all started, I felt like I was actually in control. But firing Richard was just the beginning. There were others, a whole network of people who'd enabled Gerald's operation. I spent the next month cleaning house, letting go of anyone who'd been complicit. Some went quietly. Others threatened lawsuits, tried to intimidate me. But Victor had my back, and the evidence Edward had provided was airtight. One by one, they left, and I started rebuilding the company with people who actually cared about doing things the right way. It wasn't easy. There were days when I wanted to quit, when the weight of it all felt like too much. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was doing the right thing. Wondering if I was just as arrogant as Gerald, thinking I could fix everything. But then I'd get an email from someone like Patricia Dawson, telling me how much it meant to have her home back. Or I'd see a news story about another family we'd helped. And I'd remember why I was doing this. Amanda tried to reach out a few times. She'd call, leave voicemails that I never listened to. She sent letters that I threw away unopened. I didn't want her apologies or her explanations. Whatever we'd had was gone, and I didn't see the point in pretending otherwise. But one afternoon, she showed up at the office. Security tried to stop her, but she insisted, said it was important. Against my better judgment, I agreed to see her. She looked different. Thinner, paler, like she hadn't been sleeping. She sat down across from me, and for a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. I know you don't want to hear from me, she said. And I don't blame you. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. Not just for what happened, but for everything. For not being strong enough to stand up to my father. For letting him treat you the way he did. Okay, I said. She looked at me, surprised. That's it? Just okay? What do you want me to say, Amanda? That I forgive you? That everything's fine now? Her eyes filled with tears. I just want you to know that I regret it. All of it. I nodded. I believe you. But that doesn't change anything. She wiped her eyes, stood up. I know. I just needed you to hear it. She walked to the door, then stopped. For what it's worth, she said, I think what you're doing with the company is incredible. My father's furious, but he's also scared. And he should be. She left, and I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty chair. Part of me wanted to call her back, to ask if things could have been different. But I knew the answer. Some things can't be fixed, no matter how much you want them to be. Gerald didn't stay quiet for long. A month after I fired Richard Moss, he filed a lawsuit. It was a desperate move, claiming I'd obtained control of the company through fraud and coercion. He had no real evidence, just accusations and desperation. But he had money, and money buys time. The lawsuit dragged on for months, tying up resources and energy I didn't have to spare. Victor fought it hard, but it was exhausting. Then something unexpected happened. One of Gerald's former business partners reached out to me. His name was Thomas Brennan, and he'd worked with Gerald in the early days of Hartley Financial. They'd had a falling out years ago, and Thomas had been pushed out of the company. But he'd kept records, documents showing that Gerald had used shell companies to hide assets and avoid taxes. He offered them to me, not for money, but because he wanted to see Gerald finally face consequences. With Thomas's documents, Victor filed a countersuit. We went after Gerald for fraud, tax evasion, and a dozen other charges. The evidence was overwhelming. Within weeks, the state attorney general opened an investigation. Gerald's lawsuit against me collapsed, and suddenly he was the one on the defensive. His lawyers scrambled, trying to cut deals, but it was too late. The dam had broken, and everything he'd tried to hide came flooding out. The trial was set for 6 months later. I didn't want to wait that long, but Victor said we needed the time to build an airtight case. So I focused on running Hartley Financial, on turning it into something that actually helped people instead of hurting them. We restructured our lending practices, hired ethics consultants, created oversight committees. It was slow work, and there were setbacks. But gradually, the company started to change. One afternoon, I got a call from my mom. She sounded excited, almost breathless. "You need to come over," she said. "Right now." I drove to their house, worried something was wrong. But when I got there, my parents were sitting at the kitchen table with a couple I didn't recognize at first. Then the woman turned, and I saw her face. It was Mrs. Chen, another name from Edward's list. She and her husband had lost their restaurant property to Hartley Financial 5 years ago. They'd been trying to rebuild ever since, but they'd never fully recovered. My mom stood up, smiling. "Mrs. Chen heard about what you're doing. She wanted to meet you." Mrs. Chen stood, shook my hand. Her grip was firm, her eyes clear. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "We got a letter yesterday. From your company. Saying they're returning our property. We thought it was a mistake." "It's not a mistake," I said. "You should never have lost it in the first place." She started crying, and her husband put his arm around her. My dad got up, put his hand on my shoulder again, that same silent gesture of support. That night, after the Chens left, I sat with my parents in their living room. My mom made tea, and we talked for hours. About the past, about what Gerald had done, about what I was trying to build. And for the first time in months, I felt like maybe I was doing something that actually mattered. The weeks leading up to Gerald's trial were chaotic. The media coverage intensified, with reporters camping outside Hartley Financial offices and my apartment. I stopped giving interviews, stopped engaging with the press. I just wanted to get through it, to see justice done and move on with my life. But the attention was relentless, and the pressure was suffocating. Victor kept me grounded. He'd stop by most evenings, bring takeout, and we'd go over the case. He was confident we'd win, but he warned me not to get complacent. "Gerald's lawyers are good," he said. "They'll try every trick they can think of. We need to be ready for anything." I trusted him. He'd gotten me this far, and I knew he wouldn't let me down. The trial started on a cold Monday morning in November. The courthouse was packed, every seat filled with reporters, lawyers, and people who'd been hurt by Gerald's schemes. I sat in the front row, Victor beside me, watching as Gerald was let in. He looked smaller than I remembered, diminished. His expensive suit couldn't hide the fear in his eyes. When he saw me, his jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything. Just looked away. The prosecution laid out their case methodically. They brought in documents, showed emails, called witnesses. Edward Voss testified for 2 days, walking the jury through every shady deal, every hidden asset, every family that had been crushed under Gerald's greed. Thomas Brennan testified too, explaining how Gerald had manipulated financial records to avoid taxes. And then they called me. I walked to the stand, placed my hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor asked me about my marriage to Amanda, about how I'd discovered what Gerald had been doing, about the divorce and the transfer of shares. I answered every question calmly, clearly. I didn't embellish, didn't exaggerate. I just told the truth. When Gerald's lawyer cross-examined me, he tried to paint me as vindictive, as someone seeking revenge rather than justice. But I didn't take the bait. I just repeated the facts, let the evidence speak for itself. The trial lasted 3 weeks. By the end, Gerald's defense had crumbled. The jury deliberated for less than a day. When they came back, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Gerald's face went white. His lawyers tried to maintain composure, but you could see the defeat in their eyes. The judge set sentencing for a month later, and Gerald was let out in handcuffs. I watched him go, and I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not anger. Just emptiness. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I pushed through them, didn't answer questions. Victor handled the press, gave a brief statement about justice being served. I just wanted to go home, to be alone. But when I got to my car, I found Amanda waiting. She was leaning against the driver's side door, arms crossed, looking lost. I stopped, didn't know what to say. "He's my father," she said quietly. "I know he did terrible things. But he's still my father." I nodded. "I get that." She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw real pain in her eyes. Not regret, not guilt. Just raw, honest pain. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said. "Or him. But I need you to know that I'm trying to be better. I'm trying to understand how I let things get this bad." "That's good," I said. "I hope you figure it out." She pushed off the car, stepped aside. I unlocked the door, got in. Before I closed it, she leaned down. "For what it's worth," she said, "I'm glad you won." I didn't respond, just closed the door and drove away. I didn't look back. Gerald's sentencing came a month later. The judge gave him 8 years. Not as much as I'd hoped for, but enough. Enough to know that he'd face real consequences, that he couldn't just buy his way out. Patricia and Michael Dawson were in the courtroom that day. So were the Chens, and a dozen other families Gerald had hurt. When the sentence was read, some of them cried. Others just sat in silence. I felt something shift inside me, like a weight I'd been carrying finally lifted. After the sentencing, I went back to Hartley Financial. The office was quiet, most of the staff had left for the day. I sat in what used to be Gerald's office, now mine, and looked out the window at the city below. I thought about everything that had happened, about how a single act of kindness, stopping to help a stranger, had set all of this in motion. I thought about the people I'd helped, the families who had their homes back, their dignity restored. And I thought about who I'd become through all of it. I wasn't the same man who'd married Amanda, who'd sat quietly while her family mocked me. I'd learned to fight, to stand up for myself and for others. I'd learned that power wasn't about money or status. It was about what you did with it, how you used it to make the world a little less cruel. And I'd learned that sometimes, the best revenge wasn't revenge at all. It was just refusing to let someone else define your worth. My phone buzzed. A text from Victor. "Drinks? You earned it." I smiled, texted back. "Yeah. I'll be there in 20. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and took one last look at the office. Then I walked out, ready for whatever came next. 6 months passed like water through my fingers. The trial was over, Gerald was serving his sentence, and Hartley Financial was finally operating the way it should have from the beginning. But the work wasn't finished. Every day brought new challenges, new families reaching out for help, new revelations about just how deep the corruption had run. I'd become something I never expected to be, not just the owner of a company, but someone people looked to for answers. It was exhausting and fulfilling in equal measure. The office had changed completely. Gone were the cold marble floors and intimidating glass walls Gerald had installed to make clients feel small. We'd renovated, made the space warmer, more accessible. The waiting area had comfortable chairs and coffee that didn't taste like punishment. The staff smiled now, actually meant it when they asked how they could help. It wasn't perfect, but it was different. And different mattered. I was in the middle of reviewing loan applications one Tuesday morning when my assistant knocked on the door. Her name was Kelly, a single mother who'd been working in customer service before I promoted her. She was smart, organized, and wasn't afraid to tell me when I was making a mistake. I needed people like that around me. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "No appointment, but he says it's important. He won't give his name." I looked up from the stack of papers. That's not concerning at all. She smiled slightly. He doesn't seem dangerous. Just persistent. Said he knows you from before. I thought about turning him away, but curiosity got the better of me. Send him in. The man who walked through my door was maybe 70, wearing a worn jacket and a cap that had seen better days. His face was weathered, hands calloused, the look of someone who'd spent a lifetime working with them. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking around the office like he wasn't sure he belonged. Then his eyes landed on me, and something shifted in his expression. Ryan Cooper, he said. It wasn't a question. I stood up, came around the desk. Do I know you? He took off his cap, held it in both hands. You helped my daughter once. About 8 years ago. She had car trouble on Route 17, and you stopped. Changed her tire in the rain. Wouldn't take any money for it. I tried to remember, but 8 years was a long time and I'd helped a lot of people over the years. My father had taught me that if you saw someone in trouble, you stopped. That was just what you did. I'm glad I could help, I said. But I'm not sure why you're here now. He reached into his jacket, pulled out an envelope, old and yellowed at the edges. My daughter passed away 3 years ago, he said quietly. Cancer. Before she died, she made me promise to find you if I ever needed help. Said you were the kind of person who actually cared. I felt my chest tighten. I'm sorry for your loss. He nodded, didn't look at me. We're losing our house. My wife and I. We took out a loan 10 years ago to help pay for my daughter's treatments. The bank sold our mortgage to some company, and now they're foreclosing. We tried to fight it, but we can't afford lawyers. I thought maybe, since you run this place now, maybe you could look at our case. I took the envelope, opened it. Inside were loan documents, foreclosure notices, letters from lawyers. I scanned through them, and my stomach dropped. The mortgage had been sold to a subsidiary of Hartley Financial 3 years ago. During Gerald's time. The loan terms had been changed without proper notification, the interest rate had ballooned, and the foreclosure process had been rushed through. It was textbook predatory lending. What's your name? I asked. Frank Morrison, he said. And your wife? Helen. We've lived in that house for 42 years. Raised 3 kids there. I set the papers down, looked at him. Mr. Morrison, I need you to listen to me. You're not losing your house. Not if I have anything to say about it. We're going to fix this. His eyes filled with tears. He tried to speak, couldn't get the words out. Just nodded. I called Kelly in, asked her to get Victor on the phone and to pull every file we had related to the Morrison loan. Within an hour, we had a full picture. The loan had been deliberately structured to fail, and the foreclosure was scheduled for the end of the month. We had less than 3 weeks to stop it. Victor worked fast. He filed an emergency injunction, halting the foreclosure. Then we went after the subsidiary that had bought the loan, the same shell company Gerald had used to hide dozens of other predatory mortgages. We restructured the Morrisons' loan, brought the payments back to something manageable, and forgave the fraudulent fees that had been tacked on. By the end of the week, Frank and Helen Morrison's home was safe. I drove out to their house the following Saturday to deliver the news in person. It was a small place on a quiet street, the kind of neighborhood where people still knew their neighbors' names. Frank answered the door, and when I told him everything was settled, he collapsed into a chair and wept. Helen came out from the kitchen, and when she understood what had happened, she hugged me so tight I thought my ribs would crack. You didn't have to do this, Frank said, wiping his eyes. Yes, I did, I replied. Your daughter was right to trust that people care. Because some of us still do. That visit stayed with me for days. It reminded me why I was doing this, why I couldn't just walk away and let someone else run Hartley Financial. Every file on my desk represented a person, a family, a life that had been upended by greed. And as long as I had the power to fix it, I would. But the work was taking a toll. I wasn't sleeping well, wasn't eating right. I'd lost weight, and the bags under my eyes had become permanent fixtures. Victor noticed, told me I needed to slow down. But I couldn't. There were too many people who needed help. One evening, I was working late in the office when my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was shaky, and my heart immediately jumped into my throat. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," she said quickly. "I just needed to hear your voice. You don't call as much anymore." "I know, Mom. I'm sorry. I've just been buried in work." She was quiet for a moment. "Your father and I are proud of you. You know that, right? What you're doing, helping all these people, it's exactly what we raised you to do. But we're also worried. You sound tired, honey. When's the last time you took a day off?" I couldn't remember. "I don't know. Come have dinner with us this weekend," she said. "Just a few hours. No work talk, just family." I agreed, and when I hung up, I realized how much I'd been isolating myself. I'd been so focused on fixing everyone else's problems that I'd stopped taking care of my own life. That weekend, I drove to my parents' house. My mom made her famous pot roast, and we sat around the table like we used to when I was a kid. My dad told stories about the shop, about customers who brought in appliances so broken they were beyond saving. We laughed, really laughed, and for a few hours, I felt like myself again. After dinner, my dad and I went out to the garage. He was working on an old television someone had dropped off, and I helped him test circuits and replace capacitors. We didn't talk much, just worked side by side the way we had when I was growing up. There was something grounding about it, something that reminded me where I came from. When we finished, he turned to me. "You're doing good work, son. But don't forget to live your own life while you're fixing everyone else's." I nodded. "I'm trying, Dad. I know you are. Just remember, you can't pour from an empty cup." The next few months brought more changes. We expanded Hartley Financial's community outreach programs, partnered with nonprofits to offer financial literacy classes, and created a fund to help families who were struggling but didn't qualify for traditional assistance. The response was overwhelming. People who'd been hurt by the old Hartley Financial started to see us as a force for good, and slowly, the company's reputation began to shift. But not everyone was happy about it. There were still people loyal to Gerald, investors who'd profited from his schemes and weren't thrilled about the new direction. I started getting pressure from the board, suggestions that I was being too generous, that we needed to focus more on profit margins. I listened to their concerns, but I didn't budge. This company had caused enough harm. It was time to do things differently, even if it meant smaller returns. One board member in particular, a man named Stuart Callahan, became increasingly vocal about his displeasure. He'd been one of Gerald's oldest friends, had invested heavily in Hartley Financial over the years. In a board meeting 3 months after Gerald's sentencing, Stuart stood up and addressed the room. "This company is not a charity," he said. "We have shareholders to answer to, profits to maintain. What Mr. Cooper is doing is admirable, but it's not sustainable. We need to return to sound business practices." I let him finish, then stood up myself. "Sound business practices," I said. "Is that what we're calling predatory lending now? Destroying families for profit?" I looked around the room. Every person here benefited from what Gerald did. You knew what was happening, and you turned a blind eye because it made you money. Well, that's over. If you don't like the direction this company is going, you're welcome to sell your shares and leave." Stuart's face went red. "You can't just dictate terms like this." "Actually, I can. I own the controlling interest. And I'm telling you right now, we're not going back to the way things were. If you want to fight me on this, go ahead. But you'll lose." The room went silent. A few board members looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. Stuart grabbed his briefcase and walked out. 2 other board members followed him. The rest stayed, and when the meeting resumed, we moved forward with the new policies. Losing those board members was a risk, but it was necessary. I couldn't build something better while dragging along people who wanted to preserve the old system. Over the following weeks, I brought in new board members, people with backgrounds in community development, social work, and ethical finance. They brought fresh perspectives and a genuine commitment to doing things right. Slowly, the culture of the company continued to evolve. Around this time, I started receiving letters. Not angry ones from investors, but thank you notes from families we'd helped. They came by the dozens, handwritten letters telling me how much it meant to have their homes back, their debts forgiven, their lives restored. I kept every single one in a folder on my desk. On hard days, when I felt overwhelmed or questioned whether any of this mattered, I'd read through them and remember why I was fighting. One letter stood out. It was from a woman named Sarah Chen, daughter of the couple my parents had introduced me to. She wrote about how her parents had lost everything when Hartley Financial foreclosed on their restaurant property, how they'd spent years rebuilding, working multiple jobs just to survive. She thanked me for returning the property, said it had given her parents hope again. But what struck me most was the last line. You didn't just give them back a building. You gave them back their dignity. That's something no amount of money can buy. I read that letter 3 times, and each time, I felt the weight of responsibility settle a little heavier on my shoulders. This wasn't just about mortgages and financial restitution. It was about recognizing people's humanity, about acknowledging that everyone deserves to be treated with respect. Gerald had built an empire by forgetting that. I was determined not to make the same mistake. As the 1-year anniversary of the trial approached, I started thinking about the future. Hartley Financial was stable, the reforms were working, and we'd helped hundreds of families. But I knew I couldn't do this forever. The job was consuming, and I could feel myself burning out. I needed to start thinking about succession, about finding someone who could carry this mission forward when I eventually stepped back. But that was a problem for another day. For now, I had work to do. One afternoon in late spring, I got a call from the state attorney general's office. They wanted to meet, said it was about Gerald's case. I drove downtown, met with an assistant AG named Rachel Torres. She was sharp, no nonsense, the kind of prosecutor who didn't waste time on pleasantries. She got straight to it. We've been reviewing the evidence from the Hartley case, she said. And we've uncovered additional instances of fraud involving other executives who worked under Gerald. We'd like your cooperation in pursuing those cases. I agreed immediately. Anyone who'd participated in Gerald's schemes deserved to face consequences. Over the next several months, I worked closely with Rachel's team. We provided documents, testimony, access to company records. 3 more executives were indicted, and 2 of them eventually pleaded guilty. It was exhausting, reliving everything again, but it was necessary. Justice wasn't just about punishing Gerald. It was about dismantling the entire system he'd built. And that meant holding everyone accountable, no matter how long it took. By the time summer arrived, I was exhausted. Victor suggested I take a vacation, get away from everything for a while. I resisted at first, said there was too much work to do. But he insisted, said the company would survive without me for a week. So I booked a cabin upstate, somewhere quiet with no cell service and no distractions. I spent a week hiking, reading, and doing absolutely nothing productive. It was exactly what I needed. When I came back, I felt clearer, more focused. I realized I'd been so consumed by the fight that I'd forgotten to think about what came after. What did I actually want for my life? Running Hartley Financial had given me purpose, but was it what I wanted to do forever? I wasn't sure. So I started exploring options, thinking about what a future might look like where I wasn't defined by this company or by my battle with the Hartley family. I started attending community meetings, getting involved in local initiatives that had nothing to do with mortgages or finance. I volunteered at a food bank, helped organize a fundraiser for the local hospital. I reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with during the chaos of the past 2 years. Slowly, I started building a life that existed outside the shadow of everything that had happened. And it felt good. It felt like healing. One evening, I was having dinner at a small restaurant downtown when I saw her. Amanda. She was sitting alone at a corner table, picking at a salad, looking more tired than I'd ever seen her. For a moment, I considered leaving, avoiding the awkwardness of another encounter. But something made me walk over. She looked up, surprised. "Ryan," she said. "Hi. Mind if I sit?" She gestured to the empty chair. "Please." We sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Finally, she spoke. "I heard about the additional indictments. Your people have been thorough." "It wasn't my people. It was the Attorney General's office." She nodded. "Still. You started it. You made sure they couldn't hide anymore." I didn't respond. She set down her fork. "I've been seeing a therapist. Trying to understand how I let things get so bad. How I became someone I don't recognize." "That's good," I said. "I mean it." She looked at me. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I'm trying to be better." "I believe you," I said. "And I hope you succeed. But that's something you have to do for yourself, not for me." She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "I know." We talked for a little while longer, about nothing important. When I left, I felt a strange sense of closure. Not because I'd forgiven her, but because I realized I didn't need to. Her journey was her own, and mine was mine. They didn't have to intersect anymore. A few weeks later, I made a decision. I called a meeting with the board and announced I'd be transitioning out of the CEO role over the next year. I'd stay on as chairman, provide oversight and guidance, but day-to-day operations would be handed over to someone else. The board was surprised but supportive. We began the search for my replacement, someone who shared the vision for what Hartley Financial could be. The transition took time. We interviewed dozens of candidates, finally settled on a woman named Grace Okoye. She had a background in community development finance, had spent years working with nonprofits to provide affordable housing. She was smart, compassionate, and had the kind of quiet strength that inspired confidence. When I met her, I knew she was the right choice. Over the next 6 months, I worked closely with Grace, teaching her everything I knew about the company, introducing her to key stakeholders, making sure she had the support she needed. She took to the role naturally, brought fresh ideas and perspectives I hadn't considered. By the time I officially stepped back, I felt confident the company was in good hands. On my last day as CEO, the staff threw a small party in the conference room. There were speeches, a cake, people saying kind things that made me uncomfortable in the best way. Frank Morrison showed up, along with Patricia Dawson and several other families we'd helped. They presented me with a plaque, engraved with a simple message. "To the man who stopped." It was perfect. As I drove home that evening, I thought about everything that had happened over the past 3 years. I'd gone from being someone dismissed and underestimated to someone who'd taken down one of the most powerful men in the state. I'd helped hundreds of families, changed an entire company, and somehow managed to find pieces of myself I thought I'd lost. But more than any of that, I'd learned something important. Your worth isn't determined by how others see you. It's determined by how you see yourself, and by what you choose to do when no one's watching. I pulled into my driveway, a new place I'd bought 6 months ago. Nothing fancy, just a comfortable house in a quiet neighborhood. I walked inside, dropped my keys on the table, and looked around. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. My phone buzzed. A text from Victor. "Proud of you, man. Drinks this weekend?" I smiled, texted back. "Absolutely." I poured myself a glass of water, walked out to the back porch, and sat down. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere across town, families were sitting down to dinner in homes they'd almost lost. Somewhere, Frank and Helen Morrison were probably watching television in the house they'd lived in for over 40 years. And somewhere, Gerald Hartley was sitting in a prison cell, finally facing the consequences of his actions. I took a sip of water and allowed myself to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Contentment. Not because I'd won, but because I'd refused to become the kind of person who stayed silent when he saw injustice. And that, more than anything else, was worth fighting for. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.